The Soldier Who Never Left. Valley Forge Winter, 1778. The wind howled through the forests of Pennsylvania, carrying snow, hunger, and silence. At Valley Forge, thousands of Continental soldiers shivered inside crude log huts, wrapped in threadbare blankets, wondering if America would survive another season. Among them stood 23-year-old Elias Carter, a blacksmith from Virginia. Before the war, his hands had shaped horseshoes and wagon wheels. Now, they gripped a worn musket. He wasn't chasing glory. He was fighting for a promise that ordinary people could decide their own future. Every morning began the same way. Frozen boots, empty stomachs, and another roll call with fewer names than the day before. Disease spread faster than bullets. Some men had no shoes. Bloody footprints stained the snow, earning the nickname the Army of Bloody Feet. Still, no one quit. General George Washington rode through camp almost every day. He looked tired, just like the men, but he never looked defeated. That mattered. One bitter morning, Elias was ordered to gather firewood with 3 other soldiers. As they disappeared into the woods, they spotted movement between the trees. British scouts. The Americans froze. The British hadn't noticed them yet. Elias whispered, "If they find this camp, they'll know exactly how weak we are." The 4 men exchanged nervous glances. Running wasn't an option. They quietly circled through the trees, hoping to steer the scouts away from the main camp. Then, a branch snapped. The silence shattered. "There!" A musket fired. The ball slammed into a nearby tree, showering Elias with splinters. The chase was on. The Americans darted between frozen oaks, weaving through deep snow, firing only when they had to. Their goal wasn't victory. It was time. Every minute they delayed, the scouts gave Washington another minute to prepare. Elias ducked behind a fallen log and reloaded with numb fingers. His hands shook so badly, he almost dropped the powder horn. Another shot rang out. One of his friends stumbled into the snow. There was no time to stop. War rarely gave anyone that choice. The surviving soldiers reached a rocky ridge overlooking a narrow creek. Elias had an idea. He shouted, "Cross now!" The Americans splashed through the icy water, then scrambled up the opposite bank. The British followed without hesitation. That was the mistake. Hidden behind thick trees, Elias and the others fired together. The surprise volley echoed through the valley. The British line broke, confused by the sudden attack. Believing they had encountered a much larger force, the scouts pulled back. The trap had worked. By nightfall, Elias returned to Valley Forge, soaked, exhausted, and barely able to stand. Washington himself thanked the patrol for protecting the camp. It wasn't a grand speech, just a quiet nod, and the words, "Well done." For Elias, that was enough. Weeks turned into months. Then, something remarkable happened. A seasoned officer from Europe, Baron von Steuben, arrived at camp. He transformed exhausted volunteers into disciplined soldiers. Every drill mattered, every formation improved. Slowly, the army changed. The men who had once struggled to march together now moved with confidence. The soldiers who had nearly starved through winter became a fighting force capable of standing toe-to-toe with the British. When spring finally arrived, green grass replaced frozen mud. The camp came alive. Fresh supplies arrived. Hope returned. As the Continental Army marched away from Valley Forge, they weren't the same men who had entered it. They were stronger, tougher, united. Elias survived the war. Years later, when neighbors asked if Valley Forge had been the hardest battle he ever faced, he always smiled before answering. "There wasn't much fighting," he'd say. "The real enemy was cold, hunger, and giving up." He believed the revolution wasn't won by one famous battle. It was won because thousands of ordinary Americans refused to surrender when everything seemed lost. Their greatest victory came before they ever stepped onto another battlefield. They endured, and because they endured, a nation endured with them. Sometimes, history remembers the loudest victories. But the quiet courage shown at Valley Forge, where men chose hope over despair, day after day, became one of the strongest foundations of the United States. Not every hero charged into cannon fire. Some simply woke up every freezing morning, picked up their musket, and stood their ground. And sometimes, that kind of courage changes the world forever.